boy. We've done so many. We do a lot in prisons and in hospitals, things like that. It's not the size.
Within the family, Dennis Wilson was often seen as the black sheep. But with you, who is he? It's none other than the most iconic bands in music history, right? Welcome back, music lovers. Today we're diving into the turbulent and fascinating life of a true icon of the surf rock era. This is the life and death of the Beach Boys' Dennis Wilson. Born on December 4th, 1944, in Inglewood, California, Dennis Wilson was the wild heart of the Beach Boys. As the band's drummer and occasional lead vocalist, he brought an authentic surf culture vibe to their music. Dennis grew up in a musical family, and along with his brothers Brian and Carl, he formed what would become one of the most influential bands in rock history. Unlike his brothers, Dennis was an actual surfer, and his passion for the waves infused the Beach Boys' sound with genuine authenticity. According to David Marks, a friend of theirs who resides in the region, Dennis was given the nickname Dennis the Menace as a result of his violent behavior. This label was given to Dennis because of his aggressive behavior. Dennis Wilson, the oldest of the three Wilson brothers, was the one who came under their father's severe discipline the most frequently. He was the one who was exposed to it the most frequently. Dennis said in 1976 that his father was a dictator who consistently assaulted them in an unfair manner. He said this in a statement. Because Dennis possessed a lot of physical energy and a combative disposition, he avoided participating in family sing-alongs and did not sign on to any of the early recordings that Brian had recorded. Additionally, he refrained from singing on one of the earliest recordings that Brian made. After a period of time had passed, Dennis referred to Brian as a quirky man who preferred to spend his time sitting in his room and listening to records rather than playing baseball. The things that Dennis enjoyed doing the most were either playing doctor with the girl next door or tinkering with automobiles. Although he would occasionally sing a song if he were asked to do so, his favorite things to do were either of these. In spite of this, Dennis would spend late evenings in the bedroom that they shared with his brothers, singing and harmonizing with them over the course of the night. When I was 9 years old, Dennis made the suggestion that my life would have been different if my father had not given me a BB pistol. He said that this would have been the case the entire time. With the help of that pistol, I was able to release the anger that I was feeling. Eventually, the pursuit of hunting, fishing, and racing became the principal things that I was interested in. In the year 1966, Brian made the observation that Dennis needed to be constantly moving about during the day. Within the shortest length of time, he was unable to remain still without shrieking and screaming. In fact, he was unable to remain immobile. Never before have I come across a person who is more twisted than he is. In the beginning, when Dennis was 14 years old, he began playing the piano, and he mastered various boogie-woogie techniques. He recalls coming to church gatherings with his family, not because of the services provided, but rather because of a girl he admired and because he wanted to play boogie-woogie on the church piano. He did this because he wanted to show off his musical talents. In order to ensure that Dennis was included in the lineup of the original Beach Boys, Audrey Wilson, the mother of the Wilsons, strongly encouraged Brian to include Dennis. In 1960, when Dennis began taking drum courses at Hawthorne High School, his teacher Fred Morgan referred to him as a drummer rather than a drummer. This made Dennis feel more comfortable with the term. On the other hand, he did see that Dennis was a quick learner when he was interested in the instrument. According to what Brian shared, Dennis was the one who advocated for them to form a group. It was Dennis's assertion that the pupils at the school were aware of Brian's musical ability because of the concerts he gave during the classroom assemblies. In spite of the fact that Dennis had first considered playing bass, he finally chose to play drums because he felt them to be more exciting than playing bass. Meanwhile, Brian made the decision to play the bass. In the course of the second half of 1961, the Beach Boys were formally created, and Murray took on the role of manager for the band. As a result of Dennis's persistence, Brian wrote the song that was included on their debut album, Surfin', which went on to become a huge success in the neighborhood. Dennis reminisced about the happiness that we experienced when we heard their song on the radio. He even went so far as to say that we got so excited. The words "listen" were on the radio were blurted out by me as I was sprinting down the street. This was a very awesome thing to do. In spite of the fact that the Beach Boys were famous for constructing an image that was centered on the surfing culture of California, Dennis was the only member of the band who really participated in surfing. In 1963, Dennis joined forces with Gary Usher, who was also working with Brian, and the two of them released a song under the moniker The Four Speeds. This was the first time that Dennis had collaborated with Gary Usher. RPM was the name of the song, and My Stingray was the band who recorded it. Dennis had moved out of the house that belonged to the Wilson family and into the Hollywood neighborhood during the month of March in the year 1964. In the sleeve notes of the album that was released in July 1964 and was named All Summer Long, he made the following statement: "They say I live a fast life." This was a consideration of the way he lived his life. Maybe it's just that I prefer living a life that's full of excitement and excitement. It is impossible for anyone in the world to convince me to give it up as a possibility. On the other hand, these recollections will make. Upon discovering the amount of money that Dennis had frittered away, Murray was overcome with emotion and began to cry. In the month of December, this information was disclosed to a reporter. It was admitted by Murray that Dennis had been a little bit too generous with his financial resources. In the statement, it is said that Dennis spent $94,000, whilst the other boys either invested their money or saved it. Although he spent $25,000 on a piece of real estate, the remainder of his money was ultimately squandered. That is a perfect example of Dennis. He is the one who is responsible for paying the bill wherever he goes. In January of 1965, the members of the band were informed that Brian would no longer be touring with the band. This information was given to them. So, there were allegations that Dennis was inconsolable, and as a possible response, he supposedly took up a massive ashtray and threatened to strike everyone with it if they would not leave as soon as possible. Ed Roach, a photographer who is a close friend of Dennis, made the assertion that Brian's behavior was motivated by jealousy at the praise that Dennis received from the crowd. Roach is a personal friend of Dennis. According to Brian, the attention that Dennis received was tough to handle since it regularly drove girls to bypass the rest of the band in order to approach him. This was a direct result of the attention that Dennis received. Later, as Dennis was thinking about the position that his brother played in the band, he made the judgment that Brian was the most essential member of the Beach Boys, and that the band would not have existed without him. Dennis appeared in a number of leading roles in the film The Beach Boys Today, which was released in March of 1965. This was because Brian recognized Dennis's latent voice talent, which led to this accomplishment. It was the first decided single that Dennis contributed to, and it reached number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100 list. Do You Want to Dance was the song that Dennis became involved with. The primary vocalist was Dennis, who provided his own take of the song. As a journalist, Peter Doggett praised Dennis's emotional delivery on In the Back of My Mind, pointing out that it had a more significant impact than his brother's more polished way. He said that Dennis's delivery was more powerful than his brother's. Dennis included his favorite piece of music by Brian Wilson, which was named Let Him Run Wild on the album Summer Days and Summer Nights, which was released in July. The composition was titled Let Him Run Wild. The year 1966 saw the beginning of Dennis's experimentation with LSD, which resulted in his conduct becoming increasingly unpredictable. Dennis's contributions to Pet's earlier recordings were significant, despite the fact that he did not play drums on the majority of the sounds that Pet produced in 1966. However, his talents were obscured by the fact that he was not included on that iconic record. The contributions that Dennis made during the Smile sessions were utilized in the production of a variety of songs, including Holidays and Good Vibrations, among others. According to rumors, the album's working title, Dumb Angel, was a reference to Dennis himself as it was being made. This is something that has been mentioned. Van Dyke Parks, the author of the song, attributes the inspiration for the song's title, Surf's Up, to Dennis. Dennis is acknowledged as the source of inspiration. Although they were working on Smile, the Beach Boys ultimately made the decision to cancel the album because they were afraid about losing their following and the impact that drugs would have on their music while they were working on it. During the latter half of the 1960s, Dennis started writing music for the Beach Boys. Around the same time, he started taking piano lessons with Brian after developing a significant interest in playing the instrument. The first version of his song, which he had recorded in January of 1967 and named I Don't Know, was never made accessible to the general public. One more piece is referred to as Tune No, 2, and one which was made in December for a solo project that was intended to be released on Brother Records, also ended up being unsuccessful. The project was supposed to be published on Brother Records. In April of 1968, Dennis made his debut as a songwriter with the publishing of his early compositions, such as Little Bird, which was included as the B-side of the Friends record. This publication marked the beginning of Dennis's career as a songwriter. In collaboration with the poet Stephen Kalanick, he was a contributor to the composition of songs such as Be Still, which was included on the Friends album that was published in June of 1968. In February of 1969, Dennis had already established himself as a producer by the time the album 2020 was published. He had been working from the beginning. Among the original songs that he has contributed are Be With Maine and All I Want to Do. He also published the song Celebrate the News as the B-side of the single, in addition to the tune Breakaway, which was included on the single. As the reputation of the Beach Boys was deteriorating, Dennis expressed his dissatisfaction with the management of the band as well as the underappreciation of Brian's abilities in the United States. This occurred during a time when the Beach Boys' reputation was on the wane. While Dennis was thinking back on this period of time, he made the conclusion that the band's potential was being stifled in comparison to the road that the Beatles chose to take. There were 2 compilation albums that were released in 2018 Wake the World, The Friends Sessions and I Can Hear Music, the 2020 Sessions. Both of these albums included recordings from this era that had not been heard before. Patricia Krenwinkel and Ella Jo Bailey were hitchhiking in Malibu on April 6, 1968, when Dennis came upon them. They were waiting for Dennis to find them. Subsequently, he offered to drive them back to their respective residences. The next time he saw them, which was 5 days later, he snatched them up and carried them to his apartment on Sunset Boulevard. It was at that time that he became aware of the fact that they had been connected to Charles Manson. Manson himself made an appearance at Dennis' house during that night, and shortly after that, Dennis' house became a temporary abode for Manson and his followers, who are collectively referred to as the Manson family. Manson's presence also occurred during that night. In the beginning, Dennis believed that Manson was interesting, and he often referred to him as the magician while he was being interviewed. This resulted in a significant financial burden for Wilson as a consequence of the fact that Manson's followers remained at Wilson's house throughout the course of the succeeding few months. This was due to the fact that they required medical treatment for their different health concerns. Manson was introduced to the connections in the music industry by Dennis, and with Wilson's support, Manson recorded songs at Wilson's home studio. Wilson was also instrumental in organizing the recording session. During the month of September in 1968, Wilson participated in the recording of the song Cease to Exist by Marilyn Manson. After that, he made some changes to the song, including alterations to the music as well as the lyrics, and in December of the same year, he released it as a Beach Boys B-side under the title Never Learn Not to Love. Following Manson's decision to relinquish his rights to publishing, Dennis presented himself as the only author of the book. On the other hand, he decided to take a sizable sum of money in addition to a BSA motorcycle, which was estimated to be worth $100,000. As soon as it was discovered that the lyrics of Dennis' song had been changed, Manson issued a death threat against him, which led the situation to become even more dangerous. Additionally, during this time period, followers of Manson were responsible for the destruction of Dennis' Ferrari and Mercedes-Benz, both of which had been taken to a mountain adjacent to Spahn Ranch. Both vehicles had been placed there for the sake of safety. As the amount of horror that Dennis was experiencing intensified, he ultimately decided to leave his house and move into a basement apartment in Santa Monica with Greg Jacobson. It was his intention to create some distance between himself and Manson, and he executed this act. It was just a few days before the lease was scheduled to end that the Manson family, who had been left behind, seized practically all of Dennis' belongings and were subsequently dismissed from their lease. Manson made an effort to maintain communication with Dennis by leaving a bullet and a letter of threat with his maid. This was one of the ways that Manson sought to stay in touch with Dennis. And the amount of narcotics that Manson was consuming on a regular basis caused him to become more concerned. In his biography, Mike Love described Dennis's experience of witnessing Manson allegedly committing acts of gun violence, which caused Dennis to feel an overwhelming sense of anxiety. Terry Melcher, who pointed out that Dennis was aware of the illegal operations that his family was participating in, confirmed Dennis's distress by pointing out that Dennis was aware of the activities. His grief was compounded by the fact that Dennis was unwilling to report the incident to the police out of fear, as he explained. Following the murders of Tate and LaBianca, which were carried out by the Manson family in August of 1969, Manson demanded money from Dennis, and Dennis obliged with his request. By the month of November, Manson had been arrested for a number of murders that he had committed. The prosecutor, Vincent Bugliosi, had a private interview with Dennis because he was just too afraid to testify in front of the government. As a result of the fact that Jacobson had given his consent to testify, his testimony was not necessary. He made the judgment that the prosecution did not consider Dennis to be reliable. Melcher made this comment. According to what Bugliosi has indicated, Dennis is said to have destroyed the Manson tapes because he came to the conclusion that they had bad energy. In subsequent years, members of the Manson family made death threats against Dennis. These threats were made more often. Dennis's book, The Beach Boys and the California Myth, which was released in 1978, was an attempt to answer the questions that the general public had regarding his connection to Manson. Additionally, he published a statement indicating that he will provide additional material at a later time. According to the biography of Dennis, written by Mark Dillon, the self-destructive behavior of Dennis was brought on by feelings of dread and guilt around the fact that he was the one who introduced Manson to the profession of halibut. Carol Friedman, Dennis's first wife, shared with Tom O'Eel, a writer, the information that Dennis and other persons had deeper connections to Manson than was publicly acknowledged. He was notified of this information by Carol Friedman. Friedman issued a warning that anyone who is aware of anything will never discuss his or her knowledge. In the aftermath of Dennis's death, Manson stated that my shadow was responsible for the murder of Dennis Wilson because he had stolen my music and altered the lyrics from my soul. This allegation, however, was never supported by any evidence that he ever presented. One of the roles that Dennis played in the road movie Two Lane Blacktop, which was produced by Universal Pictures, was one that he filmed between the months of August and October in the year 1970. Throughout the course of the movie, James Taylor, who plays the character of the driver, and Dennis, who plays the position of the mechanic, are shown driving throughout the United States in a 1955 Chevrolet in order to compete in street racing and make money. On July 7, 1971, it was presented to the public for the first time globally in New York City, and it was received with a wide range of responses at the time. On the other hand, it eventually became a famous cult classic. Dennis continued to write songs for the Beach Boys while also contributing to the album Sunflower, which was published in 1970. Sunflower was a contribution that Dennis made to the album. This album had 3 more tracks in addition to the song Forever, which received a lot of appreciation from music critics. These tracks were Slip On Through, Got to Know the Woman, and It Gets About Time. Slip On Through was finally released as an aside single as a consequence of Warner Reprise's request that the songs of Dennis be included owing to the contemporary spirit that they exuded. Around the beginning of the 1970s, he worked with Daryl Dragon to record tracks for a prospective solo album that was supposed to be titled Freckles. The album was still in the process of being recorded. The record, on the other hand, was never really released. Additionally, he was responsible for the publication of the singles Sound of Free and Rumbo under the management of the Dennis Wilson and Rumbo publishing companies. As far as Dennis is concerned, the songs 4th of July and Wouldn't It Be Nice to Live Again were not featured on the album Surf's Up, which was published by the Beach Boys in the year 1971. It was noted by Dennis that these tracks did not fit in with the overall flow of the release. At the time that this was taking place, none of his songs had been completed and released, despite the fact that they were being saved for a solo album. A handful of tracks from these sessions were included in the box collection titled Feel Flows, which was published in the latter part of the year 2021. Due to the hand injury that Dennis received in 1971, his role in the band began to wane, and Ricky Fatter finally took over as the band's drummer. This occurred as a result of the hand injury. Dennis's drinking habits became more severe, and his involvement in the band became more erratic. Both of these characteristics persisted. He continued to provide songs such as Make It Good and Cuddle Up, which were included on the album Carl and the Passions, which was published in 1972. He also contributed songs such as So Tough and Steamboat and Only With You, which were initially broadcast on Holland in 1973. In Holland, the song Carry Me Home by him was not included in the music selection. In several instances, the live concerts of the Beach Boys were disrupted as a result of Dennis's onstage antics, which included streaking. Over the course of the whole year, he continued to contribute to the production of his solo album at Brothers Studios in Santa Monica. In 1974, when the compilation of Dennis's best songs named Endless Summer was at the height of its popularity, Dennis began his career as a drummer. During that year, it is reported that he worked with Billy Preston on the lyrics of You Are So Beautiful and made some tweaks to the song. This took place when he was attending a party with Billy Preston. Billy Hinch, who was present and played the keyboards, confirmed that Dennis had contributed to the song. He also mentioned that the song was performed in concert because of Dennis's contribution, which was the specific reason why the song was performed. Although Dennis had gathered a significant amount of songs by the year 1977, he was under a great deal of stress as a result of tensions within the Beach Boys. Due to the fact that he was feeling frustrated, he went to James William Guercio of Caribou Records and successfully negotiated a deal for 2 albums. The need for a manner of recording that is disciplined was emphasized by Guercio, which provided Dennis with the ability to exert creative control. In 1977, Dennis released his debut solo album, which was titled Pacific Ocean Blue. This achievement occurred in the year 1977. The song reached its highest place on the Billboard chart in the United States, which was number 96, exceeding the sales of the 2 Beach Boys albums that came after it. It was during the tour that the Beach Boys were on in 1977 that Dennis sang some of his solos. This was despite the fact that his plans for a solo tour were ultimately abandoned. The book is estimated to have sold roughly 250,000 copies, which is a direct result of the cult following that was developed for Pacific Ocean Blue. The novel received positive reviews. 2008 was the year that it was released once more, and this time it was successful enough to chart in both the United States of America and the United Kingdom. There was a title given to it, the reissue of the year. The year 1978 marked the commencement of Dennis's second album, Bamboo, which he produced with the aid of Carly Munoz, the pianist for the Beach Boys. The album was released in 1978. It's Not Too Late, Constant Companion, All Alone, and Under the Moonlight were some of the songs that they recorded, all of which were written by Munoz. Other songs that they recorded include Under the Moonlight. Despite this, the project was put on hold due to a number of factors, including financial difficulties, Dennis's struggles with alcoholism and drug abuse, and other projects that the Beach Boys were working on at the time. Bamboo was eventually published in the later half of 2008, along with the reissue of Pacific Ocean Blue. In 2017, it was released on vinyl for Record Store Day, which was a celebration of the publication of the album. On the album L.A. Light, which was released in 1979, there were 2 tracks that were recorded during the Bamboo sessions. These songs were included on the album. It was Love Surrounds Maine and Baby Blue that were the songs in question. In addition, Dennis and Brian worked together on recording sessions that are known as the Cocaine Sessions. These recordings took place in the early 1980s, but these recordings have not been made available to the general public. A number of marriages and partnerships were among the relationships that Dennis was involved with during his personal life. The pair had a daughter called Jennifer and an adopted son named Scott during his first marriage, which was to Carol Friedman. The couple also had a son named Scott who was adopted from another family. The couple hitched the wedding in 1965, and they divorced the following year in 1967. It was via his second marriage to Barbara Charon that he was able to have 2 of his sons, Michael and Carl, born to him. Several of his compositions, like Lady and Barbara, were inspired by his relationship with Barbara, which served as the inspiration for the songs. After this, Dennis tied the knot with the actress Karen Lamb on 2 separate occasions, the first time being in 1976 and the second time being in 1978. He was a professional pianist from Chicago named Robert Lamb, and she had been married to him in the past. In the years 1979 to 1982, Dennis was romantically involved with Christine McVie, who was a member of Fleetwood Mac. This relationship lasted for a period of time. McVie wrote the song Only Over You about Dennis, whom she saw to have qualities of a childlike and unpredictable nature. The song was written from the perspective of Dennis. Mick Fleetwood made a statement about Dennis's lively and chaotic lifestyle, which was driven by drugs and booze as they were being introduced to one another. He said that Dennis's lifestyle was fueled by these substances. At a later time, Greg Jacobson proposed the idea that Dennis could have been suffering from attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, that had not been detected. Dennis was no longer with Sean Murray Harris, with whom he had a son named Gage Dennis, who was born in 1982. When Dennis died away, he was no longer with Sean Murray Harris. Previous to their marriage, Dennis was married to Sean Murray Harris. Love refuted the claim that Sean was the daughter of Dennis's bandmate Mike Love, stating that he was not the daughter of Love. Love disagreed with the notion that Sean was the daughter of Love. Additionally, Dennis was well known for his charitable efforts, and while he was on tour, he usually visited nursing homes and hospitals that housed children. He was also recognized for his charitable works. In his latter years, Dennis suffered with considerable drug abuse, including alcohol, cocaine, and heroin. He also struggled with substance abuse. In addition, he had a problem with heroin. Due to the fact that he had lost the capacity to converse, had trouble performing, and had forgotten how to play drums by the time he reached his final year, he was unable to attend a number of Beach Boys performances. In September of 1977, Dennis made the revelation to Rolling Stone that he was leaving the Beach Boys. This was despite the fact that he was experiencing feelings of neglect despite the success of his solo effort. Following the conclusion of a quarrel that had taken place, this declaration was made. After a period of 2 weeks, he made apologies with the band during the course of that time. During the month of January in 1981, Dennis was accused of being engaged in an event in which he was responsible for convincing Brian to acquire cocaine products. This resulted in a violent assault taking place at Dennis's apartment, which was carried out by Brian's bodyguard and his cousin. Dennis persisted in engaging in activities related to substance misuse, notwithstanding the legal consequences that were imposed on others. The amount of pressure that was being put on Brian to go to treatment increased, and Dennis felt that he would be the next target for the band. An ultimatum was issued to him in September 1983, stating that he had to go to rehabilitation or face the possibility of being banned from performing. While he was living on the streets and following a nomadic lifestyle at the time, he entered recovery for a brief amount of time nonetheless. He continued to struggle with addiction during his time there. Dennis, who had spent the day drinking, died on December 28, 1983 in Marina del Rey, California. This unfortunate sequence of events occurred after Dennis had spent the day drinking. During the process of their divorce, which had occurred 3 years earlier, he had been attempting to retrieve the belongings of his ex-wife, which had been thrown overboard from his yacht. Following an inquiry, forensic pathologist Michael Hunter arrived at the opinion that Dennis most likely experienced a blackout in shallow water just before his passing death. This result was reached after the study was completed. On the 4th of January, 1984, the United States of America put Dennis to rest at sea. There is a Coast Guard stationed in the waters off the coast of California. A statement was released by the Beach Boys in which they emphasized their commitment to carry on Dennis' legacy through the music that they make. One of the songs that was performed at the burial ceremony was Farewell, My Friend. According to Sean Love, Dennis's wife, Dennis had expressed a desire to be buried at sea, and his brothers Carl and Brian were opposed to the idea of cremation. Sean Love also said that Dennis had expressed a desire to be buried at sea. In the beginning, the only veterans who were allowed to be buried at sea without first being burned were those who had served in the Coast Guard or the Navy. On the other hand, Dennis was given the opportunity to be laid to rest at sea thanks to the leadership of Ronald Reagan, who was serving as president at the time. Brian expressed his dissatisfaction with the arrangement in the year 2002, noting that he thought Dennis should have been given a traditional funeral. He considered that Dennis should have been given a funeral. Dennis Wilson's spirit lives on through his music and the waves he loved so much. Though his life was brief, his impact on rock history is undeniable. Thank you for joining us in remembering the life of Dennis Wilson. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more stories about the legends of music. Until next time, keep the music alive.